Lakshmi Pichai, sat near the back row of the grand auditorium. Her sari was simple, her seat unmarked. She didn't come for the applause. She came because her son told her this moment mattered. The room sparkled with chandeliers and the flash of cameras. Rows of officials in fine suits and glittering saris sat upright, waiting for the Prime Minister to arrive. But Lakshmi's eyes weren't on the stage. She watched a young boy holding his father's hand. The boy's shoes were worn, but his smile was bright. It reminded her of Sundar, years ago, when he would sit cross-legged on the floor, piecing together broken radios with tiny fingers and wide dreams. The host announced the arrival of the guest of honor. Everyone stood. Applause echoed across the hall as Prime Minister Narendra Modi walked in. He nodded, calm and focused, before taking his seat at the front. Lakshmi stayed seated, not out of disrespect, but because her knees ached. The woman next to her gave her a sharp look, then turned away. The ceremony began. Speakers spoke of science, progress, achievement. Sundar Pichai sat among them, proud, yet humble. Then came the moment that no one expected. The host cleared his throat. We have a surprise speaker today. Someone who holds a quiet piece of our nation's story. Please welcome, Lakshmi Pichai. There was silence, confusion, then a soft murmur. A few cameras turned. Lakshmi looked up, stunned. Me, she whispered. A young volunteer stepped forward, nodded, and extended a hand. Lakshmi hesitated, then stood slowly. The room watched as she walked toward the stage, not with pride, but with grace. Not with importance, but with purpose. The crowd didn't clap at first. They didn't know who she was. Then Sundar stood up, and he clapped. The sound echoed. One by one, others joined, until the room filled with applause. Lakshmi looked at her son, eyes soft, then turned to the microphone. I was told to speak, but I didn't plan to, she said gently. I came here just to listen. I never imagined I would be called. People leaned in. When Sundar was a boy, she continued, he would sit for hours with wires, metal scraps, and broken things. He didn't ask for toys. He asked for tools. I didn't always understand him, but I let him be. A smile touched her face. One day, I saw him fix our neighbor's fan. He was 10. No one had shown him how. He just, figured it out. And I realized then his mind worked differently. A hush fell over the hall. But this story isn't just about Sundar. It's about another boy, many years before. A boy who used to sweep floors at a tea shop. Who listened more than he spoke. Who read every page he could find. That boy became the leader of this nation. She turned to Prime Minister Modi. Sir, she said gently, you inspired a generation by showing that no dream is too small. Modi looked surprised, then deeply moved. But there is something about you, Lakshmi continued, that many don't know. Something you hide not out of shame, but out of humility. The crowd leaned forward. Reporters adjusted their cameras. Lakshmi paused, then smiled. You love poetry. Gasps, whispers. Eyes turned to Modi, whose calm face now showed a flicker of surprise. Double quotes. Yes, Lakshmi said softly. You write. In silence. In solitude. With heart. I found your old poem once. In a magazine tucked away in our son's collection. I read it. And I cried. Modi blinked, stunned. It was a poem about mothers, Lakshmi whispered. And struggle. And sacrifice. Not just the grand kind, but the quiet kind. The kind women make every day, without ever being noticed. Now, the crowd was silent, completely still. Lakshmi looked out at the room. So today, she said, I want to honor the leader who rose from nothing, and still remembers everything, not just the loud things, but the silent ones too. Modi stood up slowly. The entire room followed. No music played. No one spoke. But in that moment, Lakshmi Pichai didn't just share a secret. She reminded a nation that true strength lies in stillness, in kindness, in humility, and that even the most powerful man in the country once bled words onto paper, ... in the dark, when no one was watching. The applause faded slowly, not because the moment was over, but because people were trying to hold on to it. Lakshmi Pichai stepped down from the stage with calm dignity. Sundar rose from his seat and gently took her hand. For a second, they stood side by side, mother and son, both quiet, both changed. Prime Minister Modi hadn't sat down. He looked out over the audience, then gave a rare smile. "There are some truths," he said, voice steady, "that reach the heart before they reach the mind. Today, Lakshmi ji reminded us of that." Lakshmi bowed her head slightly. Sundar guided her back to her seat. People around them now looked at her with new eyes, eyes filled with respect. After the event, a quiet buzz spread across the venue. Officials and journalists whispered to each other. "Did you know Modi ji wrote poetry? Was that really in a magazine? What else don't we know?" A well-known journalist named Raghav leaned against the back wall, thoughtful. He remembered an old issue of a forgotten literary magazine from decades ago. It had a poem titled Mother's Feet. The author's name, N. Modi. No first name, just initials. Raghav pulled out his phone and began searching, but the poem was nowhere online. Maybe it was never digitized. Maybe it was meant to stay forgotten, but not anymore. Backstage, Lakshmi sipped warm water. She looked tired, but peaceful. Sundar sat beside her, quiet for a moment. "Oma," he said, "how did you find that poem?" She smiled. "It was tucked in your old school books. I found it when you were in America. It stayed with me. I didn't even know who wrote it until last year. I saw the handwriting again in one of Modi ji's letters printed in a newspaper. The loops, the way he crosses the T, I remembered." Sundar shook his head, amazed. "You remembered someone's handwriting from a poem you read once, years ago." "Some things," she said, "don't leave you." Meanwhile, the Prime Minister was in his car, unusually quiet. His aide Amit glanced at him. "Double quotes, sir," Amit asked carefully. Was what she said true? Modi looked out the window. "Yes," he said softly. "I used to write a lot. Before politics. Before people listened." Amit hesitated. "Would you like to address it publicly?" Modi shook his head. "Not yet. The poem isn't about me. It's about all mothers. And maybe the world needs to remember that before they remember me." As the convoy drove away, another quiet moment was forming elsewhere. Raghav. The journalist returned home and opened his dusty file drawer. Inside, wrapped in old paper, was that magazine from long ago. He had kept it because of that one poem. It reminded him of his own mother. He had never known who wrote it. Now he did. He turned the page and read the words again. Tears welled in his eyes. At the same time, thousands of people who had seen the event replay on television were flooding social media. The moment Lakshmi said "you love poetry" was now everywhere. No hashtags, no shouting, just soft reverence. But the next morning, something happened that no one expected. A new post appeared on the Prime Minister's official website. No press release, no signature, just an image of a single poem, ... typed in plain font, titled Mother's Feet. No one confirmed it. No one needed to. People read it in silence. Some cried, others called their mothers. Schools began printing it for students to read, and Lakshmi. She sat at home with Sundar, drinking tea. "Amma," Sundar said, holding the printed page, "your words brought this back into the world." Lakshmi smiled gently. "No," she whispered, "his heart did. I only reminded it to speak again." And just as she said that, a knock came at the door. A young man stood there with an envelope. No logo, no badge. just a plain seal. Lakshmi opened. Inside was a short handwritten note. Thank you for remembering the boy who used to write in the dark. You reminded the man he never left. No name, no title, but she knew. The note rested on Lakshmi Pichai's table, next to her empty teacup. The handwriting was soft, slanted, full of care. She read it again before folding it gently and placing it into a worn wooden box where she kept her most precious things, her wedding photo, Sundar's first report card, and now, a note from a boy who had become a prime minister. Sundar watched her from the kitchen. Amma, do you realize what you've done? She smiled. No, Kanna. I only said the truth. But the truth, once spoken, can ripple far beyond its speaker, across the country. The poem Mother's Feet had touched millions. People began sharing their own memories. A girl in a small town wrote about her mother walking miles to buy her books. A young boy shared a photo of his grandmother's hands, cracked from years of cleaning dishes. News channels didn't just report politics that day, they read poetry. Classrooms opened with students reading Mother's Feet out loud, and at the center of it all was a quiet woman who had never asked for the spotlight, but now, that spotlight was searching for her. Reporters gathered outside Lakshmi's modest home. They wanted interviews, photos, sound bites. Lakshmi, however, refused to speak. She made tea for them instead. Would you like to come in? She asked, one older journalist politely. It's hot outside. Inside, she offered biscuits and water. Please don't make this about me, she said softly. The words matter more. The journalist nodded, moved. He didn't write about her tea, or her silence. He wrote about a nation remembering softness in a world that had grown sharp. Meanwhile, in Delhi, an unexpected conversation was happening inside the Prime Minister's residence. Amit, the aide, had been flooded with requests. Sir, he said, standing near the door, publishers want to release a book, the poem, and any others you might have. Modi looked up from his desk. Why now? Amit paused. Because the country needs more than speeches. They need soul. The Prime Minister didn't answer right away. He turned to a shelf and pulled down a dusty black notebook. I stopped writing before the campaign days, he said quietly, but I never threw these away. He handed Amit the book. Decide what to do, he said. But promise me this: no fame, no front covers, just words. Amit nodded slowly. Just words. In the following days, a small project began quietly. A book titled Echoes in Silence would be published anonymously. No fanfare. Just poems from a quiet corner of history. But something else was brewing. And it started with a little girl named Anaya in a school outside Chennai. Anaya had watched Lakshmi's speech with her mother. She didn't understand everything, but she heard the part about tools, not toys. It stuck in her heart, so the next day, she brought her broken toy car to school not to play, but to learn how to fix it. Her teacher, surprised, asked why. Because, I want to be like Sundar Pichai, she said. The teacher smiled and posted the moment online. That post went viral. Schools across India began organizing fix-it workshops, not just in science labs, but in homes, in temples, even in train stations. People gathered to repair old things together. Radios, fans, bicycles, clocks. But they were also repairing something deeper. The spirit of trying, the spirit of remembering where we come from, and the spark that lit it all came from a woman who spoke gently and a leader who once wrote in the dark. A week later, Sundar sat with his mother in a small park. Birds chirped. Children laughed nearby. Amma, Sundar said softly, did you know the president of Singapore called to ask about you? She blinked. What for? They want you to speak at the Unity Forum. Lakshmi looked up at the sky. Clouds drifted by. I'm not a speaker, she said. But they believe in what you said, Sundar replied. And how you said it. Lakshmi thought for a long time. Then she turned to her son. I will speak, she said, but only if I can talk about hands, the hands that build, the hands that raise, not just mine, but every mother's, every worker's, every forgotten one. Sundar smiled, and far away, on a quiet night in Delhi, Prime Minister Modi opened his notebook again and began to write. The night before the Unity Forum, Lakshmi Pichai stood in front of a mirror in her simple hotel room. The soft yellow light above her flickered slightly, but her eyes were steady. Beside her, a folded paper rested on the dresser. It wasn't a speech. It was a prayer, written in her own hand, not for attention, but for strength. Outside the venue, crowds gathered early. The forum was an annual gathering of global minds, but this year felt different. Banners still showed the names of tech leaders, scientists, and presidents, but one name, quiet and written in small font, was being whispered more than the rest. Lakshmi Pichai. People had come not to hear facts, but to feel something real, something forgotten. Sundar adjusted the microphone on the side stage. Amma, he said softly, you don't need to impress them. Just tell your truth. Lakshmi nodded, wearing a simple sari. No makeup, no fanfare, just presence. When her name was called, the crowd rose not out of protocol, but out of respect. Lakshmi walked slowly to the center of the stage. The hall was large, yet silent. Cameras rolled, lights blinked, but all eyes were on her. She took a breath and began. I want to speak about hands, she said. Not a single person moved, not hands that wave, or clap, or type, but hands that carry water, that cook food before the sun rises, that hold the feet of crying children, that fix things quietly, that plant seeds without knowing if they will bloom. Somewhere in the back row, a woman wiped her eyes. When Sundar was young, Lakshmi continued, he brought me a broken radio. I didn't have money to buy another, so I sat with him. I watched his small hands open it, study it, fix it, and that day, I knew his future was bigger than anything I could imagine. The crowd leaned in, but I also want to talk about another pair of hands. They once held teacups, served strangers, turned pages in the dark. They wrote poems when the world was asleep, and those hands now sign the hopes of a nation. Gasps. Rose. She was speaking about Modi openly, directly, gently. Those hands, she said, never forgot their past, and because of that, millions have found the courage to remember their own. She paused, letting the silence breathe. We celebrate success, she said, but we forget struggle. We post achievements, but we hide sacrifice. I am not here as a mother of someone famous. I am here as a woman who has burned her fingers cooking, torn her sari mopping floors, and still smiled when no one noticed. A man in a business suit nodded slowly, visibly moved. We do not need perfect leaders, Lakshmi said. We need present ones, who remember pain, who carry it with grace, and who speak of kindness, even when it's not fashionable. She folded her hands together. I thank you for listening to a small voice, for remembering that the hands behind greatness are often invisible, and that love, patience, and humility are still stronger than power. She bowed slightly. The crowd didn't erupt. They rose quietly, reverently, and stood in long applause, not loud, but deep, like thunder from far away. After the speech, Lakshmi stepped backstage. Sundar wrapped his arms around her. Oma, he said, you changed the room. No, she said gently. I reminded them what was already there. Within minutes, clips of her speech spread across the world, translated into dozens of languages, not for trend but for truth. But the most powerful moment wasn't in the speech. It came that night, when Prime Minister Modi, alone in his residence, sat by his window and watched the stars. His aide entered quietly. Double quotes. Sir, would you like to respond publicly? Modi shook his head. I already have, he said, and he handed over a small envelope. Inside was a single page, Another poem, a tribute titled The Hands That Lift. It wasn't released to the press. Instead, it was sent directly to Lakshmi, along with a note. Some hands teach us how to build, others teach us how to rise. Lakshmi received it with grace. She didn't display it. She placed it next to the first letter in her wooden box and closed the lid with care. It had been 3 days since Lakshmi Pichai stood on that stage and spoke about hands. 3 days since her soft words wrapped around the world, and yet, the echoes hadn't faded. In a small village in Gujarat, a retired school teacher gathered her neighbors under a banyan tree. She read Lakshmi's speech aloud, line by line, pausing after each sentence. By the end, no one spoke. The village women, some who had never been to school, held hands in quiet solidarity. In Mumbai, a group of young coders renamed their mentorship group to Hands That Build. They started offering free weekend lessons to children whose parents worked as domestic helpers. One of them, Kavya, whispered, "Because we are not just lifting code, we're lifting dreams." Across social media, new stories emerged on a fame, but a forgotten effort. An elderly man in Kerala posted a photo of his mother's rusted sewing machine. The caption read, "She stitched every shirt I wore to college. She gave me the world and never asked for anything." But the most unexpected ripple came from inside the corridors of power in the parliament canteen. Staff whispered about a new moodless rush, more gratitude. Ministers paused to greet the workers who served them tea. Security guards were handed warm meals instead of cold orders. Something had softened. Prime Minister Modi, too, was watching. Not from a distance, but up close. He had quietly instructed his office to send copies of the poem, The Hands That Lift, to every government school in the country. Not as propaganda, but as inspiration. It arrived with no seal, no signature, only a note. "Read this, feel this, remember this." Lakshmi, however, had returned home. Her house looked the same walls, same fan that made a soft humming sound. But the air was different now. Letters poured in daily. Strangers sent her drawings, poems, photos of their mothers, and one morning, a package arrived, a wooden frame. Inside it, a photo of her speaking on stage. Below it, etched into the frame, was a single line, "When the world needed healing, a mother spoke." She didn't know who sent it. She didn't ask. She simply hung it near the kitchen. "Amma," Sundar said, looking at it, "how does it feel?" Lakshmi smiled softly. "It feels like someone finally lit a lamp in a dark room, and now others are carrying that flame." The next morning, a call came. Not from a news channel, not from an awards committee, but from a government school. Headmaster in Bihar, he asked Lakshmi for something simple. "Would you visit our school? Not to speak, just to sit with our students. To let them see that kindness can be powerful too." Lakshmi agreed. The visit was quiet. No media, no guards. Just children with wide eyes and open hearts. She sat on the floor beside them, helped them draw, helped them write small poems. One girl, shy and barefoot, handed her a crumpled note. It read, "My mother can't read, but she taught me to dream." "Is that a poem?" Lakshmi held the note to her chest and whispered, "Yes, child. It is the most beautiful poem of all." Meanwhile, Raghuv, the journalist who first remembered the poem from years ago, was working on something more, a documentary. Not about politics, not about fame, but about women like Lakshmi, mothers, teachers, workers, weavers. He called it The Silent Pillars. The project grew quickly. People volunteered stories, photos, voice clips. Lakshmi agreed to narrate the opening. "This is not a story about one woman," she said in the recording. "This is a story about all those who hold the sky above our heads and never ask for credit." As the documentary trailer launched, people wept, not because it was dramatic, but because it was honest. Prime Minister Modi watched it privately, with his close team. When it ended, He said only one word, needed, and that same day, without any announcement, he reinstated a long-forgotten Initiative 1 that documented stories of unsung workers across India. This time, he named it after the final words of Lakshmi's Unity Forum speech, "Hands behind greatness." But Lakshmi never asked for monuments, or titles, or fame. She spent her days planting tulsi near her window, writing notes to children, answering letters with gentle words, and sometimes, when the house was quiet, she would open the wooden box. She would reread the poem, and then the note, and smile, because something had changed, not just in the country, but in how people began to see each other, and how they began to see themselves. The days turned into weeks, but the world did not move on. It didn't forget, because something in Lakshmi Pichai's voice had taken root gently, but deeply. Schools continued to read Mother's Feet during morning assemblies. Children carried drawings of hands, some strong, some tired, some gentle. They called them hands of heroes. Teachers now asked, not just for homework, but for heart work. Tell us about someone who lifts you, someone who loves in silence. In a train station in Madhya Pradesh, a boy gave his seat to an old woman and said, "My Uma says kindness makes you tall, even when you're small." The woman smiled. She had tears in her eyes, not from pain but from being seen. Back in Chennai, Lakshmi walked through her local market. No one took selfies, no one surrounded her, but every fruit vendor, every flower seller, every hand that passed her change held it just a moment longer, not to keep her, just to thank her. Sundar had returned to his work abroad, but he called daily Amma. He said one evening, "Something amazing happened today." "What is it, Kanna?" "A company launched a global initiative. Every worker must write a letter to someone who shaped them. It doesn't matter who, just someone forgotten. They called it the Quiet Spark. They said it was inspired by your words." Lakshmi sat near her window, wind playing with her sari. "That's not my doing," she said gently. "That's just people remembering what matters." But not everyone had forgotten her name. A formal invitation arrived weeks later, an international summit, world leaders, innovators, artists, and in the center of it all, they had placed a new keynote speaker, Lakshmi Pichai. She declined. Instead, she sent a letter. "I do not need stages," she wrote. "I need spaces. Spaces where children feel safe, where mothers feel heard, where the broken are not left behind." The committee was stunned, so they did something unusual. They changed the summit theme. From future frontiers to the hands that lift us. They filled the room with stories of workers, farmers, healers, and mothers. They read her letter aloud at the end of the final session. No applause followed, only silence, the good kind, the thinking kind. And then, quietly, one by one, people began placing small candles near a picture of her letter, not because they were told to, but because something inside them asked to. Prime Minister Modi watched this moment unfold through a live feed. He sat in his study, alone, a file open on his lap. Next to him, on the desk, sat an old notebook and a pen. He turned to a fresh page and began writing again. The poem had no title, just a single line repeated again and again. "Remember the hands, Lakshmi." Never saw the summit? She didn't need to. She was sitting under the neem tree outside her home, surrounded by children. She was helping them write thank you letters. "Not to me," she said softly. "To your mother, your grandmother, the bus driver, the nurse, the woman who mends your school bag." A boy raised his hand. "Can I write to a man who fixed my bicycle?" "Yes," she smiled, "because love has no title." As the sun dipped low, the sky turned golden. A cool breeze brushed the earth, and somewhere a bell rang from a nearby temple. Lakshmi looked up. And she whispered, more to herself than anyone else, "If a seed can grow into a tree, then maybe a word can grow into a world." Far away, inside that same wooden box near her bed, 2 letters and 2 poems rested, but the box was no longer closed. She had opened it, and now the whole world had stepped inside. The year rolled into its final month, and winter began to kiss the earth with soft winds and gentler skies. But the warmth that had started from one speech, one poem, one quiet woman, had not faded. It had only spread wider. Lakshmi Pichai was now a name people said with softness, not fame. Children painted her with folded hands. Old women whispered her name during evening prayers. Her image never appeared on billboards, but her words were written on classroom walls, on kitchen calendars, and on the hearts of those who had never been heard before. In Delhi, something rare was taking place. Prime Minister Modi had decided to visit a small government school, not for a headline, but for a promise. No media was informed. No cameras rolled. Only one person stood beside him, Raghav, the journalist who had first held on to the poem from decades ago. As they entered the school, the children stood up in surprise. They had seen this man on television. Now he was here, real, human. One girl shyly walked up and held out a drawing. It was a picture of a woman standing in a kitchen, sunlight behind her, a notebook in her hand. Below it, the girl had written, "My mother has poems too. She just doesn't write them. She lives them." Modi held the paper for a long moment. He turned to the teacher and asked, "May I sit with them for a while?" He sat on the floor with the students, listened to their voices, and then spoke a line that would later be remembered for years. "I used to write because no one listened. Now that people listen, I write so I don't forget." Meanwhile, in Chennai, Sundar returned home for a few quiet days. He brought with him something small, but important, a printed copy of the first edition of a book. It had no author name, no glossy cover, just the title, stamped in simple letters, "The Hands That Lift." Inside were poems from the past, from the heart, from the edge of silence, and on the first page, a dedication for those who love without asking, who build without praise, and who teach us to remember the light when the world forgets. Lakshmi took the book in her hands and ran her fingers across the cover. "I never imagined this," she whispered. "You didn't have to," Sundar replied. "You lived it." That evening, under the soft glow of the porch light, Lakshmi did something unexpected. She took out her own notebook, an old one, frayed at the edges, and she began to write. Not a speech, not a poem, but a letter to every mother who had doubted her worth, to every father who worked in silence, to every child who had felt unseen. She wrote not in perfect grammar, but in perfect heart. She titled it simply, "You Matter," and the next morning, Sundar posted it online. Within hours, it was translated into 20 languages. Within days, it was read at community halls, schools, weddings, funerals, and even prisons, because it spoke to everyone who had ever loved in silence. And now, something new began, a movement. Without leaders, people across India and around the world began writing their own "You Matter" letters. Strangers left them on buses, pinned them to trees, placed them in library books. Some were long. Some just said, "Thank you for staying." They didn't ask for likes. They asked for healing. And as this wave moved quietly across nations, Lakshmi watched from her small garden. A breeze touched her cheek. She looked up at the neem tree, now full of green dot. Sundar sat nearby, watching her. "Amma," he asked, "do you think it will last?" She looked at him with the same calm smile she had carried for decades. "Not everything needs to last," she said. "Some things just need to begin." She leaned forward and whispered, "But this? I think it has already become something more. Not mine, not yours, but everyone's." Just then, a young girl came to the gate with a folded letter. She handed it shyly to Lakshmi and ran back without a word. Lakshmi opened it slowly. Inside, in crayon letters, it said, "Thank you for helping my papa see me again." She folded the letter, placed it into her wooden box, and closed the lid gently. But this time, she left it unlocked, because the story no longer needed a stage. It had become a light, carried forward by thousands of hands, by kindness, by memory, by truth.